13%. Working families have seen grocery prices jump 18.6%. Used car prices rise 26.2%. And energy prices soar by 33.9%. Millions of Americans have earned pay raises at work, but runaway inflation has left them with less purchasing power than before. Our southern border is in crisis, shattering all-time records for illegal immigrant apprehensions. Streets and neighborhoods are being swallowed up by violent crime. After local Democrats have cut police budgets, liberal prosecutors have turned jails into revolving doors, and national Democrats spent years amplifying the kinds of anti-police rhetoric that result in more crime. And President Biden is helping the radical left go on offense and bring a culture war to the doorsteps of normal American families, trying to squeeze Catholic hospitals and faith-based daycares out of business, trying to take school choice and curriculum transparency away from parents, and on and on and on. President Biden campaigned on being the adult in the room, but he's not even calling the shots in his own party. Over and over, on issue after issue, this president has handed the car keys to the radical left and turned himself into a passenger. That's why working families across the country have voted for change. They elected a Republican majority in the House of Representatives to put the emergency brakes on runaway liberal spending. They re-elected all-star Republican governors in places like Texas, Georgia, and Florida. And they elevated a talented new generation of leaders, including the youngest serving governor in America, Governor Sanders of Arkansas, whom the American people will hear from tonight. Our country may still be struggling to understand what on earth Washington Democrats think they've actually accomplished in the past 2 years. But they can be absolutely sure where Republicans stand.
All right, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell there talking about what he would like President Biden to say in this State of the Union address, talking about the number of issues Republicans want talked about and addressed there. And of course, he also mentioned who's going to be giving the GOP response. New Arkansas Governor, Republican Sarah Huckabee Sanders, former White House press secretary. There's also going to be a Spanish language response given by new Republican member of Congress from Arizona, Juan Ciscomani. So we have a lot in store tonight. We're going to take just a quick commercial break. Live Now look there outside of the White House as we await for President Biden to leave his home and make his way to Capitol Hill. Of course, sometimes each and every State of the Union, I believe we do get that vantage point of the motorcade. If we have it, we'll show it to you. Of course, we're going to be back in 2 minutes with more reaction from lawmakers. Next up, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. We'll see you after the break. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks so much for being with us. We do now have a Live Now look outside of the White House as the motorcade will prepare to go to Capitol Hill. President Biden will be traveling very soon here. And we, of course, await live looks inside of the House chamber, where so many of Washington, D.C. will be tonight to listen to President Biden's third State of the Union, but his first with divided government. Right now, we want to take the opportunity to show you more reaction in the run-up to the speech. This one from Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer earlier today.
Working with the various agencies as well as whatever legislation is needed. So that's, let me go on now to the SOTU. I'm looking forward from hearing President Biden later today about the amazing progress we've made in improving the lives of American families and to hear his vision for the next 2 years in the administration. As Majority Leader and under the leadership and vision laid out by President Biden, we've been able to deliver more for the American people than ever before. All the bills that we passed, like guns, like PACT, like bipartisan infrastructure, like CHIPS and science, like marriage equality, we did bipartisan. So people who say, how are you going to get things done this year? I always try to get things done in a bipartisan way. Getting things done is number one in the Senate. For most issues, you need bipartisanship. Now, of course, when we can't get things done in a bipartisan way, we'll try to get them done on our own. And that was the American Rescue Plan, passed in 2021, and, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, passed in 2022. And we've had one of the most historic Senates around. This Senate majority has stuck together. We've gotten votes. Unity is our strength. And we're going to keep at it. And I believe we will stay unified. I'm really, really excited about the upcoming 2 years, as I said. But there's an additional layer, which is implementation. And we're going to do everything we can to implement all these great accomplishments. People say, well, a lot of people don't know of them. Well, of course, they passed in legislation. Not everybody follows day to day what's going on in the Senate or what's going on in the House. But this year, you will see us rolling out these things that matter to people. I just saw it in my home state of New York. We passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, a record amount of money for infrastructure. People sort of read about it, maybe they read a line, but, it's abstract. But last week, the President and I went to Gateway, which has been a dream and passion of mine, and announced it's really happening. And the exultation in New York was great. That's going to happen over and over and over in state after state and city after city. So I believe you're going to see the American public really, really proud, popular, and happy with what we were able to do, in addition to what we'll try to do in this Senate. Okay? So we are unified here in the Senate as Democrats. House Democrats are pretty unified, too. But it's a stark contrast to compare what's going on with House Republicans. The back and forth between Speaker McCarthy and the MAGA Republicans, and it shows lack of unity, which is very, very worrisome and troublesome. Right now, the House Republicans are risking economic disaster by holding our country hostage to push their extreme, unpopular, and downright dangerous agenda. And that's why they're scared to show their cards to the American people in general, and certainly when it comes to debt ceiling. Our plan's simple. It's a plain, simple plan. Raise the debt limit clean. It's simple, but it's a real plan. It's how we've done it 4 times in the last several years under both Republican and Democratic administrations. And we are saying to tell our Republican friends and Speaker McCarthy, show us your plan. He says he wants cuts. Where? He hasn't named a single place where he wants them. Is it going to be Social Security or Medicare? Don't just say no, prove it. Show us your plan. Now you say, well, he said, well, he's not going to do that. But a number of his Republicans are still saying they want to do it. The very same Republicans who got their way when they were organized We can't be sure they won't cut Social Security and Medicare until we see their plan. So the only thing we hear is a lot of rhetoric. One member says they want to cut the woke agenda. What's that? What cuts does that mean? Some say the woke military agenda. I don't even know what the heck they're talking about. But we need a plan. And yesterday, the House Appropriations Chair said they'd consider cutting SNAP benefits. Money to feed children who would otherwise go hungry? Are they really going to cut that? They have no plan. No plan. You can't say we want cuts and then not show us what they are. So it's getting to be clear, you know, well, let me just say, if making sure that hungry children.
All right, so we just wanted to show you some of Senator Chuck Schumer from today, previewing President Biden's State of the Union. That's going to be given now in about 30 minutes' time. We're at the bottom of the hour. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks so much for being with us. We have a few Live Now looks on the streets of Washington. Well, this one there outside of the White House as President Biden gears up to travel from his home to Capitol Hill. We also have this camera posted up as well to catch the motorcade as it goes to Capitol Hill. We're also learning from Fox's Capitol Hill correspondent that the Senate has gavelled in. Senators are now filing across the Capitol through the Rotunda and Statuary Hall to the House chamber. Remember, the House chamber is where these joint sessions take place, especially for this State of the Union. And remember, the White House did put out several excerpts of what President Biden is going to say in his speech tonight. I want to put up the last one for you, and I want to read it. And this is just a paragraph here talking about bipartisan unity. It says, "To my Republican friends, if we could work together in the last Congress, there's no reason we can't work together in this new Congress. The people sent us a clear message. Fighting for the sake of fighting, power for the sake of power, conflict for the sake of conflict gets us nowhere." It goes on to say, "And that's always been my vision for the country, to restore the soul of the nation, to rebuild the backbone of America, the middle class, to unite the country. We've been sent here to finish the job." Live Now look there of President Biden in the motorcade. And you can see we almost just caught him there, but we could see he is in the back seat on his way to the Capitol. We also have this Live Now look as well, as the motorcade will definitely be making its way down. I believe that's Pennsylvania Avenue. But the motorcade right now leaving the White House. President Biden set to deliver his third State of the Union as president. We also have this Live Now look up as well. So a lot of Live Now looks all around the streets of D.C. as President Biden heads to Capitol Hill. This is his first State of the Union with divided government. There's going to be a new face sitting behind him on the dais, of course, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, next to Vice President Kamala Harris. So interesting looks there. We have to take a quick commercial break. We'll be back in just a moment with more analysis. We'll be speaking with White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Christian Daytalk, about what he's hearing is going to be in the speech tonight. More on that in 2 minutes. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. As we here approach the State of the Union, we're monitoring these Live Now looks from all across Washington. We've just been seeing the motorcade there. Also, it looks like the people behind President Biden have taken their seats. Take a look at that. Vice President Kamala Harris, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. We don't really see that every day. Let's bring into the conversation right now, of course, as we continue to preview the State of the Union, Washington Examiner White House correspondent Christian Daytok, friend of the program. Christian, thanks so much for being with us as we walk our viewers through the preview in the next 20 or 25 minutes or so. From your reporting, Christian, tonight, what is the president's message, main message, going to be? Is it going to be he's ready for possibly 2, 4, 6 more years as president?
We can look at this speech tonight, Andrew, as sort of a soft launch of that 2024 presumed re-election campaign you alluded to. But I think the theme of the night will likely be unity. And you touched on it just before the break. There are 4 specific pillars President Biden says he wants to work with Republicans on in these next 2 years. He will spend substantial time discussing those in detail, but he'll also talk about the economic progress we've seen in these last couple of months. It's going to be a fact-filled speech, and one that I think we're all on our toes waiting to hear what the president's going to say, again, heading into these next 2 years of divided government.
Yeah, Christian, it's always interesting to see as the members make their way into the chamber, who's talking to who's not talking to who. And you saw there Congressman George Santos. The camera was kind of zoomed in right on him. No doubt he's given House Speaker, new Speaker McCarthy quite a headache in the first month of the new Congress. We also have a Live Now look there of the motorcade. Let's talk over the motorcade right now as it, I believe, passes the Kennedy Center there, it looks like at least, as it makes its way to the Capitol.
Well, again, Andrew, you mentioned George Santos. This is a story that Kevin McCarthy did not want to be dealing with upon picking up the gavel. Republicans wanted to hammer President Biden on his economic principles, the fact that there is so much chaos at the southern border. The last thing he wanted to do was sort of quell dissent within his own ranks, and that's exactly what Representative Santos has presented Republicans. He's, of course, recused himself from sitting on any House committees. That being said, he's given Democrats and other critics of the Republican Party ample ammo to sort of go after these quote-unquote grifters who seem to have hitched their wagons, so to speak, onto the MAGA movement this past year and a half or so.
And of course, you know, Christian, at least during the 2020 campaign, President Biden wanted to, quote, restore the soul of America. And you've heard him time and time again, especially after January 6th. A lot of prominent Democrats talk about threats to democracy. Will we hear that tonight?
We'll certainly hear that, but I think it's especially important for the president to sort of put his hat back on as uniter-in-chief, because quite frankly, much of the American public is not happy with the job he's done uniting these two parties within his first 2 years in office. There was an NBC News poll out from Sunday, I want to say, that showed just 23% of respondents viewed the president as capable of uniting the country. He also scored extremely poorly when it came to being competent to handle the rigors of office, being able to handle a crisis like this Chinese spy balloon we saw last week. This is going to be a very important step for the president towards winning re-election. It's going to kick off tonight here in just a few moments. Again, this is going to be a very different tone we've heard from President Biden. He's railed against these quote-unquote extremist MAGA Republicans. I expect him to take a very different tact, trying to extend an olive branch to work on some of those 4 unity pillars that we mentioned just a few moments ago.
And of course, that's always something to watch in these states of the union. If any members in the audience will, make some type of scene. We've seen that before in the past. History has shown that to us. But also, there's some reporting to suggest House Speaker Kevin McCarthy has possibly, cautioned, warned his members against just that.
That's right, Andrew. Kevin McCarthy had a closed-door meeting with Republicans this morning. He begged everyone to be on their best behavior, so to speak. He also, coming out of that meeting with President Biden last week at the White House, has suggested that he won't pull any stunts up on the dais. He won't be ripping up his copy of the speech like Nancy Pelosi did during President Trump's tenure. Which seems like just 4 or 5 years ago, but in reality was only 2 or 3 years ago. That was in early 2020 before the coronavirus kicked off. So again, this is a very different tack from McCarthy. He's promised to come at President Biden's agenda with fire and brimstone heading into these debt ceiling negotiations. So I will be very curious to see if any Republicans sort of buck the party leader. Again, dissension in the ranks is the last thing McCarthy wants right now, while he's sort of got the upper hand with the debt ceiling negotiations in flux.
Yeah, I mean, Christian, you and I last spoke, I think, on the 2-year anniversary of the inauguration just last month. And we were talking about what the new House majority will look like, what the opposition will be to the White House. And, a month and a half in, we haven't really seen that manifest itself just yet. Obviously, the debt ceiling negotiations will be one of those key inflection points. But this battle royale everyone is talking about with House Republicans and the Biden White House has not really, manifested itself like I was saying, so much so, and we'll see if this rings hollow. The president put it in his speech. He says, to my Republican friends, if we could work together in the last Congress, there's no reason we can't work together in this new Congress. Do you think that's possibly just focused and geared toward the Senate side?
I think it has to be geared towards the House also. Again, there are these 4 pillars that President Biden wants to accomplish. He's relaunched the Cancer Moonshot Initiative just in the past recent months. He also wants to work with Republicans on stemming the opioid epidemic, trying to clamp down on the mental health crisis. And then again, a topic which members of both parties have been champions of throughout history, really, is advancing healthcare for veterans and veteran families. Those are 4 very, very popular issues that the president is hoping he can work with Republicans on, and they are traditionally issues that Republicans have taken up in recent years. So I don't think this is necessarily just aimed at the Senate. Of course, Democrats hold a razor-thin majority there. These are issues that many Republicans in the House are looking to advance also.
Yeah, and Christian, we're watching, speaking of the Senate, many of the senators there process in. Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator John Kennedy speaking there, Schumer and Sanders. Sanders with a COVID-19 mask on. You see there so many of the senators making their way into the House chamber. John Ossoff from Georgia. We can see there Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley, speaking with Ruben Gallego. So always so interesting to see kind of the power players in Washington, commiserate amongst themselves in the same room. And of course, we wait to see who the designated survivor will be. We don't have that just yet. Christian, let's talk, though, about issues really the president doesn't wade much into. That, of course, I'm thinking of the southern border, immigration. Is that a part of the speech tonight? He made that trip to El Paso before the new year.
The president's going to have to address immigration. Again, this is going to be a broad brush stroke of what his 2024 platform will be, and he has to come out strong on immigration, if only for the fact that Republicans, especially Arkansas Governor Sarah Sanders, plan to make that sort of their line in the sand, which they can attack him on after this speech. And to Republicans' credit, the situation at the border has gotten worse through Biden's first 2 years in office. We've seen, again, in just the last few months, a record number of border apprehensions, both at legal ports of entry and from refugees seeking entry legally. So this is an issue that the president can't dance around. Like you mentioned, he visited El Paso just last month. This is going to be an issue that I think Democrats hope they can sort of flip the script on heading into this new year.
So, Christian, we ought to mention as well who the special guests of the White House are. That was released today. We just saw them. Unfortunately, the camera kind of panned away. I'm going to tell you who they are, though. Bono is going to be there, obviously the lead singer of U2. He's in the gallery. Also, we saw there the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova. Of course, the war in Ukraine, I can imagine, can guarantee you, will bet it's going to be brought up in this speech. Of course, that is a key foreign policy moment for the Biden White House. Also, we saw there as well Brandon Say, 26-year-old Monterey Park resident. He stopped. He disarmed that gunman there who was going to shoot up another dance studio, another dance hall after that shooter killed 11 people. He was lauded as a hero by so many. He's there tonight in the chamber.
That's right, Andrew. And I can imagine that gun violence will be a major part of this speech. Of course, we had the string of mass shootings in California to start the year. Coupled with that, crime is on the rise again. And police incidents, unfortunately, the killing of Tyree Nichols in particular in Memphis in January, that will be featured heavily in President Biden's remarks. Nichols' family is among the guest list who will be sitting with First Lady Jill Biden and Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff in their special White House box tonight. Those are going to be two of the domestic issues that President Biden hopes to sort of sway back any disillusioned progressive voters, that this won't just be necessarily a unity agenda. This is a president for the progressive wing of the Democratic Party also.
All right, Christian, I haven't mentioned yet, this is kind of, no pun intended, the elephant in the room, but the Chinese spy balloon. You cover the White House each and every day. President Biden, to my surprise, did not kind of come out before the American people on camera. Tell us what was going on here. We heard a lot from the White House press shop. We heard a lot from the Pentagon. We heard a lot from the State Department. But this could be his moment to kind of set the record straight about what entirely happened and what we're going to do to hold China accountable. Would you agree?
I certainly agree. China will be heavily featured in the speech. On the balloon in particular, I think sort of the short turnaround between when it was first spotted by news media on Wednesday to this week, to this evening, less than a week has transpired. Of course, it was shot down on Saturday over the Atlantic Ocean. The American people deserve answers. There are a lot of questions about why the president waited 4 to 5 days before ordering the Pentagon to shoot the plane down. He can use this as a forum to explain exactly the timeline on this mission and to sort of characterize how he views the relationship with China, arguably our most important frenemy, so to speak, in the international community. There were some troubling reports in recent weeks about how Air Force generals believe we will be at war with China by 2025. That is certainly not something the president is looking forward to as he begins this re-election tour. So I'd expect China to take up a significant amount of time tonight. And again, the American people do deserve answers specifically on what happened with the spy balloon.
No, that's so interesting. Christian, look at House Speaker McCarthy, Vice President Harris, both hailing from California, McCarthy from Bakersfield, Harris from the Bay Area. They're gaveling in. Christian, stay with us. We just want to listen in to some of this sound.
The joint session will come to order. The chair appoints as members of the committee on the part of the House to escort the President of the United States into the chamber: the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise; the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Emmer; the gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Stefanik; the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hudson; the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer; the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson; the gentlewoman from Oregon, Mrs. Chavez DeRemer; the gentlewoman from Virginia, Mrs. Kiggins; the gentleman from New York, Mr. Jeffries; the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Clark; the gentleman from California, Mr. Aguilar; the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu; the gentlewoman from Washington, Del Bene; the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Clyburn; the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse; and the gentlewoman from California, Mrs. Chu.
The President of the Senate, at the direction of that body, appoints the following senators as members of the Committee on the part of the Senate to escort the President of the United States into the House chamber. The senator from New York.
Okay, so Vice President Harris, Speaker McCarthy, kind of telling us who's going to be escorting the president, both House members and members of the Senate. Chad Pergram, Fox's Capitol Hill correspondent, has said Biden has arrived at the Capitol for the State of the Union, and the White House put out this video of President Biden just moments ago with this preview. Let's watch.
I'm about to head over to give the State of the Union address. But before I do that, I want you to know this. 2 years ago, our country's economy was reeling. COVID controlled our lives and our democracy faced one of its greatest threats. And folks, in the past 2 years, we've proven again that with every crisis, our country always emerges stronger. I ran for president to rebuild the backbone of this country, the middle class, to unite the country, to restore the soul of this nation. We've made so much progress, but tonight I'm going to talk about how to finish the job. I've never been more optimistic about the future of America than I am right now. So I'll see you at the Capitol.
Okay, President Biden there with that preview. Let's bring in still to the program here on Live Now, Christian Daytok, White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner. And Christian, you said, or you saw there in that video, we're going to finish the job. And I think so many are wondering, what does that mean? Does that mean a run for re-election? Will we get an official announcement for re-election sometime soon? Our sources here at Fox said it's going to come after the speech, but no one knows about timing.
That's right, Andrew. President Biden is making the case that the job isn't finished and he's the man to do it. But that could refer to a number of issues, not just his re-election campaign. Like he mentioned, COVID. The president wants to be viewed as the man who successfully ushered the country through the pandemic to better days. He also wants to be the man who not only completed that post-pandemic economic revival, but set the country up to expand economically in the years to come by bringing back manufacturing jobs, by resetting our trade relationships with countries in East Asia, with countries like China, who, again, are sort of in a stalemate with the U.S., given the war in Ukraine and the battle for hegemony on the international scale. So this is going to be a landmark moment for the president. He has a lot to gain. He also has a lot to lose tonight, should he not be able to sway some of these moderate critics that he is able to, again, complete that job.
And of course, some of those critics always bring up the president's age. So many American voters, this has been shown in polling, think he's just too old for the job. And then you have the Republican response tonight that's going to be with a young female up-and-comer, new Arkansas governor, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. So that's the Republicans' approach. And I believe her press shop has released some excerpts of what she's going to say as well.
That's right. And of course, Governor Sanders cut her teeth in the Trump administration. She served as press secretary for over a year and a half. So I'll expect sort of a bridge between the MAGA movement and where the Republican Party goes from here. Of course, former President Trump has already announced his own White House bid for 2024, but no one knows if he'll actually be the nominee. You have people like Governor DeSantis down in Florida, Senator Tim Scott in South Carolina. Of course, former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley is expected to announce in the coming weeks that she will launch her own White House bid. So the Republican Party has as much to lose and as much to gain as President Biden himself does tonight. This is going to be an important sort of moment for setting the tone for how they handle this president moving towards that 2024 general election.
Yes, and we're just watching second gentleman Doug Emhoff entering there in the upper gallery. And of course, we still await President Biden and the First Lady, but you can see many members of the president's national security team just made their way into the House chamber as well. So we are just about 7 minutes away from the speech itself. Now, as is customary, the president starts delivering his speech at 9:01:30, so about a minute 30 in, where he will begin his address. Now, historically, at least the last two have been about an hour in length, and we're expecting just that as well. And we're on the lookout because usually the White House puts out a full readout of what the speech is and what the speech says. I want to put up this and yet another major headline in the last several months, Christian. Paul Pelosi and the attack on him there in San Francisco. He's in the gallery tonight as well.
That's right. It's good to hear that Mr. Pelosi is recovering from that attack at his San Francisco home last year after the midterm elections. And I think his presence in the room is going to be important for President Biden to continue that narrative of bringing the country together. He hammered that message home leading into the midterms and sort of said, look, just because you're a Republican doesn't mean you're the enemy. But if you're fostering violence, if you're committing violence in the name of political discourse, you are bringing this country backwards. There's no place for political violence in the U.S. in 2023 and moving forward. He will, I'm sure, expand on that notion later tonight.
All right, and everyone, you're just watching the members of the Supreme Court make their way into the House chamber. Of course, Christian, that was one of President Biden's main judiciary accomplishments, getting the first African-American woman nominated and confirmed. Now, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson sits on the court after the retirement announcement there of one of the Supreme Court justices. And so that is going to be some of his legacy. The judiciary is also going to be some of his legacy as well.
The judiciary is going to be a part of every president's legacy moving forward, just because of the way the court system has been politicized in this country, Andrew. And I think it's going to be important again tonight in President's speech. You mentioned Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. I think President Biden wants to talk about how important it is to seat, non-biased justices on the nation's highest court. I don't doubt that he will point back to the Dobbs decision from last year, which, of course, set many states in motion towards banning abortion across this country. Abortion, women's health care, those are also going to be issues the president touches on tonight. Again, this isn't purely the unity agenda. He does need to reassure progressive voters that he is their guy going forward and that he can make sure those priorities, like protecting abortion access, like mandating parental leave, family leave, paid time away from the office, those are issues that he was not able to accomplish in his first 2 years in office. And that's certainly something he wants, or progressives want to see progress on in his next 2 years in office.
Okay, we just saw First Lady Jill Biden has now entered the gallery up there above the House chamber. You can see there U2's Bono, also Speaker Pelosi's husband, Paul Pelosi, who is seated next to the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States. And, you know, Christian, I was struck by the fact what you did see behind the current members of the Supreme Court, two retirees, Justice Breyer and Justice Kennedy, both in the chamber tonight in their robes. And so that's interesting to me. Let's listen to some of the sounds, Christian, while we hear and watch some of the congressional leaders come into the chamber here. Okay, Christian, we're just learning right now as the president's cabinet steps in there to the chamber, Secretary of State Blinken, Treasury Secretary Yellen. We now know who the designated survivor is going to be. This kind of tracks with the reporting that we have gotten all day. Labor Secretary Marty Walsh is the designated survivor for the State of the Union. And Christian, Fox has been reporting today that Walsh is likely leaving the Biden cabinet very soon. Sources tell Fox that he will next head up the NHL Players Association. A source close to Walsh tells our Fox News' Jackie Heinrich the deal is not final and talks are still in the contract stage. So Marty Walsh, the designated survivor tonight, as now a soon-to-be outgoing member of Biden's cabinet.
That's right. Mr. Walsh, of course, being the former mayor of Boston, is a huge hockey fan. I don't know if that factored into his decision to leave the administration, but he will be over at the NHLPA, be tasked with negotiating that labor agreement. Of course, he was a key negotiator through a number of labor-related and supply chain issues for the Biden administration over the past 2 years. There was, of course, the work stoppage at the Port of LA that seriously bottlenecked the supply chain back in 2021. And just this past year, he was able to avoid a strike with the railroad workers and railroad companies. That was going to cause many headaches heading into the holiday season. Marty is, of course, the first member of President Biden's cabinet to depart the White House, but there have been a number of other top White House officials like Brian Deese at the National Economic Council and, of course, Chief of Staff Ron Klain, who have both announced their pending departures after President Biden's State of the Union. It's going to be a new team at the White House, and looks like there's going to be a new head at the Department of Labor. This is, again, an important moment for Biden to sort of bridge the gap between what happened in the past, in the post-pandemic era, and where this country can be going. So it's going to be very interesting to see who he installs as the next Secretary of Labor.
Yeah, and Christian, of course, speaking of the border as well, we just got a glimpse of DHS Secretary Mayorkas there. House Republicans, at least some of them, they want to impeach him over his handling of the border. Now that Republicans are in control of the House, that's going to be quite the headache for the administration, is it not?
It certainly will be. And there is not only the impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas, there are all of these investigations Republicans will be opening into Hunter Biden, into President Biden's handling of classified documents, or mishandling, I guess I should say. Ian Sands, who's the spokesman for the White House counsel, has been hitting this narrative hard. He's trying to say these investigations are only a means of distracting from the economic successes President Biden has ushered in. That being said, we have seen the situation at the border get worse. There's no beating around the bush, so to speak, over the past 2 years. Republicans want answers, and that's why I expect President Biden to at least spend a small, passionate amount of time talking about how he plans to fix the country's broken immigration system later on this evening.
All right, Christian, we have hit the top of the hour, 9 o'clock Eastern there in Washington, D.C., there in the House chamber. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks so much for being with us. We were joined by White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner, Christian Daytok. Christian, stick around, but the president is going to speak in about a minute and a half. We're going to put this feed back up. Any last thoughts, Christian?
I'm excited to see what the president has to say tonight, Andrew. It's a very important moment in his tenure as president. It's an important moment for the nation. I think it's an important moment for bipartisanship going forward. So I'm just as excited as everyone at home to watch the president deliver his second State of the Union address. Of course, it's his third joint address to Congress. It should be a good one later on tonight.
All right, Christian, thanks so much. Right now, here on Live Now, we are going to listen in as we await the Sergeant of Arms to announce the president's arrival. Okay, this is Andrew Kraft here. We're just a little bit after the 9 o'clock hour. President Biden is at the Capitol, and we await the House Sergeant of Arms to make his presence known as he will walk down the dais there and start his speech. So this is the moment we really have all been waiting for tonight. We'll see what the president's message is, and there the door's open. Let's listen.
Looking forward to it.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
Mr. Speaker. Thank you. You can smile. It's okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Please. Mr. Speaker, Madam Vice President, our First Lady and Second Gentleman, good to see you guys up there. Members of Congress. By the way, Chief Justice, I may need a court order. She gets to go to the game tomorrow, next week. I have to stay home. Got to work something out here. Members of the Cabinet, leaders of our military, Chief Justice, Associate Justice, and retired Justice of the Supreme Court, and to you, my fellow Americans. You know, I start tonight by congratulating the 118th Congress and the new Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Speaker, I don't want to ruin your reputation, but I look forward to working with you. And I want to congratulate the new leader of the House Democrats, the first African-American minority leader in history, Hakeem Jeffries. He won in spite of the fact I campaigned for him. Congratulations to the longest-serving leader in the history of the United States Senate, Mitch McConnell. Where are you, Mitch? And congratulations to Chuck Schumer, another, another term as Senate Minority Leader. I think you. Only this time you have a slightly bigger majority, Mr. Leader. You're the majority leader. About that much bigger? Yeah. Well, I tell you what. I want to give special recognition to someone who I think is going to be considered the greatest speaker in the history of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. Folks, the story of America is a story of progress and resilience, of always moving forward, of never, ever giving up. It's a story unique among all nations. We're the only country that has emerged from every crisis we've ever entered stronger than we got into it. Look, folks, that's what we're doing again. 2 years ago, the economy was reeling. I stand here tonight after we've created, with the help of many people in this room, 12 million new jobs, more jobs created in 2 years than any president's created in 4 years, because of you all, because of the American people. 2 years ago, and 2 years ago, COVID had shut down, our businesses were closed, our schools were robbed of so much, and today, COVID no longer controls our lives. And 2 years ago, democracy faced its greatest threats in civil war. And today, though bruised, our democracy remains unbowed and unbroken. As we gather here tonight, We're writing the next chapter in the great American story, a story of progress and resilience. When world leaders ask me to define America, and they do, believe it or not, I can define it in one word, and I mean this: possibilities. We don't think anything is beyond our capacity. Everything is a possibility. You know, we're often told that Democrats and Republicans can't work together. But over the past 2 years, we've proved the cynics and naysayers wrong. Yes, we disagreed plenty. And yes, there were times when Democrats went alone. But time and again, Democrats and Republicans came together to defend a stronger and safer Europe. You came together to pass once in a generation infrastructure law, building bridges connecting our nation and our people. We came together to pass the most significant law ever, helping victims exposed to toxic burn pits. And in fact, it was important. And in fact, I signed over 300 bipartisan pieces of legislation since becoming president, from reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, the Electoral Count Reform Act, the Respect for Marriage Act that protects the right to marry the person you love. And to my Republican friends, if we could work together the last Congress, there's no reason we can't work together and find consensus on important things in this Congress as well. I think folks, you all are as formed as I am, but I think the people sent us a clear message. Fighting for the sake of fighting, power for the sake of power, conflict for the sake of conflict gets us nowhere. That's always been my vision of our country, and I know it's many of yours. To restore the soul of this nation, to rebuild the backbone of America, America's middle class, and to unite the country. We've been sent here to finish the job, in my view. For decades, the middle class has been hollowed out in more than, and not one administration, but for a long time. Too many good-paying manufacturing jobs moved overseas. Factories closed down. Once thriving cities and towns that many of you represent became shadows of what they used to be. And along the way, something else we lost: pride, our sense of self-worth. I ran for president to fundamentally change things, to make sure our economy works for everyone, so we can all feel that pride in what we do. To build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down. Because when the middle class does well, the poor have a ladder up, and the wealthy still do very well. We all do well. I know a lot of you always kid me for always quoting my dad, but my dad used to say, "Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck." He really would say this. It's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, "Honey, it's going to be okay," and mean it. Well, folks, so let's look at the results. We're not finished yet by any stretch of the imagination, but unemployment rate is at 3.4%, a 50-year low. A near record unemployment. Near record unemployment for Black and Hispanic workers. We've already created, your help, 800,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs, the fastest growth in 40 years. And where is it written? Where is it written that America can't lead the world in manufacturing? And I don't know where that's written. For too many decades, we imported projects and exported jobs. Now, thanks to what you've all done, we're exporting American products and creating American jobs. Folks, Inflation has been a global problem because the pandemic disrupted our supply chains, and Putin's unfair and brutal war in Ukraine disrupted energy supplies as well as food supplies, blocking all that grain in Ukraine. But we're better positioned than any country on earth right now. But we have more to do. But here at home, inflation is coming down. Here at home, gas prices are down $1.50 from their peak. Food inflation is coming down, not fast enough, but coming down. Inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months, while take-home pay has gone up. Additionally, over the last 2 years, a record 10 million Americans applied to start new businesses. 10 million. And by the way, every time someone starts a small business is an act of hope. And Madam Vice President, I want to thank you for leading that effort to ensure that small businesses have access to capital and the historic laws we enacted that are going to just come into being. Standing here last year, I shared with you a story of American genius and possibilities. Semiconductors, small computer chips the size of a fingerprint that power everything, from cell phones to automobiles and so much more. These chips were invented in America. Let's get that straight. They were invented in America. We used to make 40% of the world's chips. In the last several decades, we lost our edge. We're down to only producing 10%. We all saw what happened during the pandemic when chip factories shut down overseas. Today's automobiles need 3,000 chips, each of those automobiles. But American automobiles couldn't make enough cars because there weren't enough chips. Car prices went up. People got laid off. So did everything from refrigerators to cell phones. We can never let that happen again. That's why we came together to pass the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act. Folks, I know I've been criticized for saying this, but I'm not changing my view. We're going to make sure the supply chain for America begins in America. The supply chain begins in America. We've already created 800,000 new manufacturing jobs without this law, before the law kicks in. With this new law, we're going to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs across the country. And I mean all across the country, throughout not just the coast, but through the middle of the country as well. That's going to come from companies that have announced more than $300 billion in investment in American manufacturing over the next few years. Outside of Columbus, Ohio, Intel is building semiconductor factories on 1,000 acres, literally a field of dreams. It's going to create 10,000 jobs, that one investment, 7,000 construction jobs, 3,000 jobs in those factories once they're finished. They call them factories. Jobs paying an average of $130,000 a year, and many do not require a college degree. Jobs. Because we work together, these jobs where people don't have to leave home to search for opportunity. And it's just getting started. Think about the new homes, the small businesses, the medium-sized businesses. So much more that's going to be needed to support those 3,000 permanent jobs and the factories that are going to be built. Talk to mayors and governors, Democrats and Republicans, and they'll tell you what this means for their communities. We're seeing these field of dreams transform to the heartland. But to maintain the strongest economy in the world, we need the best infrastructure in the world. And folks, as you all know, we used to be #1 in the world in infrastructure. We've sunk to 13th in the world. The United States of America, 13th in the world in infrastructure, modern infrastructure. But now we're coming back because we came together and passed the bipartisan infrastructure law, the largest investment in infrastructure since President Eisenhower's interstate highway system. And folks, already we've funded over 20,000 projects, including major airports from Boston to Atlanta to Portland. Projects that are going to put thousands of people to work rebuilding our highways, our bridges, our railroads, our tunnels, ports, airports, clean water, high-speed internet, all across America. Urban, rural, tribal. And folks, we're just getting started. We're just getting started. And I mean it sincerely. I want to thank my Republican friends who voted for the law, and my Republican friends who voted against it as well. But I still get asked to fund the projects in those districts as well. But don't worry. I promised I'd be a president for all Americans. We'll fund these projects. And I'll see you at the groundbreaking. Look, this law will further unite all of America. Projects like Brent Spence Bridge in Kentucky over the Ohio River, built 60 years ago, badly needed repairs, one of the nation's most congested freight routes, carrying $2 billion worth of freight every single day across the Ohio River. And folks, I've been talking about fixing it for decades, but we're really finally going to get it done. I went there last month with Democrats and Republicans, and from both states, to deliver a commitment of $1.6 billion for this project. And while I was there, I met a young woman named Sarah, who's here tonight. I don't know where Sarah is. Is she up in the box? I don't know. Sarah, how are you? Well, Sarah, for 30 years, I learned, she told me she'd been a proud member of the Iron Workers Local 44, known as the Cowboys in the Sky. The folks who built Cincinnati's skyline. Sarah said she can't wait to be 10 stories above the Ohio River building that new bridge. God bless her. That's pride. And that's what we're also building. We're building back pride. Look, we're also replacing poisonous lead pipes that go into 10 million homes in America. 400,000 school and child care centers. So every child in America can drink the water instead of having permanent damage to their brain. Look, we're making sure that every community in America has access to affordable high-speed internet. No parent should have to drive by McDonald's parking lot to help them do their homework online with their kids, which many thousands were doing across the country. And when we do these projects, and again, I get criticized for this, but I make no excuses for it, we're going to buy American. We're going to buy America. Folks, and it's totally consistent with international trade rules. Buy America has been the law since 1933, but for too long, past administrations, Democrat and Republican, have fought to get around it. Not anymore. Tonight, I'm announcing new standards that require all construction materials used in federal infrastructure projects to be made in America. Made in America. I mean it. Lumber, glass, drywall, fiber optic cable. And on my watch, American roads, bridges, and American highways are going to be made with American products as well. Folks, my economic plan is about investing in places and people that have been forgotten. So many of you listening to me tonight, I know you feel it. So many of you felt like you've just simply been forgotten. Amid the economic upheaval of the past 4 decades, too many people have been left behind and treated like they're invisible. Maybe that's you watching from home. Remember the jobs that went away. You remember them, don't you? The folks at home remember them. You wonder whether the path even exists anymore for your children to get ahead without having to move away. Well, that's why I get that. That's why we're building an economy where no one's left behind. Jobs are coming back. Pride is coming back because choices we made in the last several years. You know, this is, in my view, a blue-collar blueprint to rebuild America and make a real difference in your lives at home. For example, too many of you lay in bed at night like my dad did, staring at the ceiling, wondering what in God's name happens if your spouse gets cancer, or your child gets deadly ill, or something happens to you. What are you going to get money to pay for those medical bills? Or are you going to have to sell the house or try to get a second mortgage on it? I get it. I get it. With the Inflation Reduction Act that I signed into law, we're taking on powerful interests to bring health care costs down so you can sleep better at night with more security. You know, we pay more for prescription drugs than any nation in the world. Let me say it again. We pay more for prescription drugs than any major nation on earth. For example, 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes. Many of you in this chamber do, and in the audience. But every day, millions need insulin to control their diabetes so they can literally stay alive. Insulin's been around for over 100 years. The guy who invented it didn't even patent it because he wanted it to be available for everyone. It cost the drug companies roughly $10 a vial to make that insulin. Packaging and all, you may get up to $13. But Big Pharma has been unfairly charging people hundreds of dollars, $400 to $500 a month, making record profits. Not anymore. Not anymore. So many things that we did are only now coming to fruition. We said we were doing this, and we said we passed the law to do it, but people didn't know because the law didn't take effect until January 1 of this year. We capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors on Medicare. The people are just finding out. I'm sure you're getting the same calls I'm getting. Look, there are millions of other Americans who do not or are not on Medicare, including 200,000 young people with type 1 diabetes who need this insulin to stay alive. Let's finish the job this time. Let's cap the cost of insulin for everybody at $35. Folks, and Big Pharma is still going to do very well, I promise you all. I promise you they're going to do very well. This law also caps and won't even go into effect until 2025. It costs out-of-pocket drug costs for seniors on Medicare at a maximum of $2,000 a year. You don't have to pay more than $2,000 a year, no matter how much your drug costs are. Because you know why? You all know it. Many of you, like many in my family, have cancer. You know the drugs can range from $10,000, $11,000, $14,000, $15,000 for the cancer drugs. If drug prices rise faster than inflation, drug companies are going to have to pay Medicare back the difference. We're finally giving Medicare the power to negotiate drug prices. Bringing down prescription drug costs doesn't just save seniors money, it cuts the federal deficit by billions of dollars, by hundreds of billions of dollars. Because these prescription drugs are drugs purchased by Medicare to keep their commitment to the seniors. Well, guess what? Instead of paying $400 or $500 a month, you're paying $15. That's a lot of savings for the federal government. And by the way, why wouldn't we want that? Now, some members here are threatening, and I know it's not an official party position, so I'm going to exaggerate, but threatening to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act. As my coach That's okay. That's fair. As my football coach used to say, lots of luck in your senior year. Make no mistake, if you try anything to raise the cost of producing jobs, I will veto it. Look, I'm pleased to say that more Americans have health insurance now than ever in history. A record 16 million people are enrolled in the Affordable Care Act. And thanks to the law I signed last year, saving millions are saving $800 a year on their premiums. And by the way, that law was written and the benefit expires in 2025. So my plea to some of you, at least in this audience, let's finish the job and make these savings permanent. Expand coverage of Medicaid. Look, the Inflation Reduction Act is also the most significant investment ever in climate change. Ever. Lowering utility bills, creating American jobs, leading the world to a clean energy future. I visited the devastating aftermath of record floods, droughts, storms, and wildfires from Arizona to Mexico to all the way up to the Canadian border. More timber has been burned, as I've observed from helicopters, than the entire state of Missouri. And we don't have global warming? Not a problem. In addition to emergency recovery, from Puerto Rico to Florida to Idaho, we're rebuilding for the long term. New electric grids that are able to weather major storms and not prevent those forest fires. Roads and water systems withstand the next big flood. Clean energy to cut pollution and create jobs in communities often left behind. We're going to build 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations installed across the country by tens of thousands of IBEW workers. And we're helping families save more than $1,000 a year with tax credits to purchase electric vehicles and efficient appliances, energy-efficient appliances. Historic conservation efforts to be responsible stewards of our land. Let's face reality. The climate crisis doesn't care if you're in a red or blue state. It's an existential threat. We have an obligation, not to ourselves, but to our children and grandchildren, to confront it. I'm proud of how America, at last, is stepping up to the challenge. We're still going to need oil and gas for a while. But guess what? No, we do. But there's so much more to do. We got to finish the job. And we pay for these investments in our future by finally making the wealthiest and biggest corporations begin to pay their fair share. Just begin. Look, I'm a capitalist, but pay your fair share. I think a lot of you at home agree with me and many people that you know. The tax system is not fair. It is not fair. Look, the idea that in 2020, 55 of the largest corporations in America, the Fortune 500, made $40 billion in profits and paid zero in federal taxes? Zero? Folks, it's simply not fair. But now, because of the law I signed, billion-dollar companies have to pay a minimum of 15%. God love them. 15%. That's less than a nurse pays. And let me be crystal clear. I said at the very beginning, under my plans, as long as I'm president, nobody earning less than $400,000 will pay an additional penny in taxes. Nobody, not one penny. But let's finish the job. There's more to do. We have to reward work, not just wealth. Pass my proposal for the billionaire minimum tax. You know, there's 1,000 billionaires in America. It's up from about 600 in the beginning of the term. But no billionaire should be paying a lower tax rate than a school teacher or firefighter. I mean it. Think about it. I mean, look. I know you aren't enthusiastic about that, but think about it. Think about it. Have you noticed Big Oil just reported its profits, record profits? Last year they made $200 billion in the midst of a global energy crisis. I think it's outrageous. Why? They invested too little of that profit to increase domestic production. And when I talk to a couple of them, they say, we're afraid you're going to shut down all the oil wells, all the oil refineries anyway, so why should we invest in them? I said, we're going to need oil for at least another decade, and that's going to exceed and beyond that. We're going to need it. Production. If they had, in fact, invested in the production to keep gas prices down, instead, they used the record profits to buy back their own stock, rewarding their CEOs and shareholders. Corporations ought to do the right thing. That's why I propose we quadruple the tax on corporate stock buybacks and encourage long-term investments. They'll still make considerable profit. Let's finish the job and close the loophole to allow very wealthy to avoid paying their taxes. Instead of cutting the number of audits for wealthy taxpayers, I just signed a law to reduce the deficit by $114 billion by cracking down on wealthy tax cheats. That's being fiscally responsible. In the last 2 years, my administration has cut the deficit by more than $1.7 trillion, the largest deficit reduction in American history. Under the previous administration, the American deficit went up 4 years in a row. Because those record deficits, no president added more to the national debt in any 4 years than my predecessor. Nearly 25% of the entire national debt that took over 200 years to accumulate was added by just one administration alone, the last one. They're the facts. Check it out. Check it out. How did Congress respond to that debt? They did the right thing. They lifted the debt ceiling 3 times without preconditions or crisis. They paid American bills to prevent an economic disaster in the country. So tonight I'm asking the Congress to follow suit. Let's commit here tonight to the full faith and credit of the United States of America will never, ever be questioned. Some of my Republican friends want to take the economy hostage. I get it, unless I agree to their economic plans. All of you at home should know what those plans are. Instead of making the wealthy pay their fair share, some Republicans want Medicare and Social Security to sunset. I'm not saying it's a majority. Let me give you, anybody who doubts it, contact my office. I'll give you a copy. I'll give you a copy of the proposal. That means Congress doesn't vote. Well, I'm glad to see you. And I tell you, I enjoy conversion. You know, it means if Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they... Look, folks, the idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond. Folks, as we all apparently agree, Social Security and Medicare is off the books now, right? They're not to be stopped. All right. We got unanimity. Social Security and Medicare are a lifeline for millions of seniors. Americans have to pay into them from the very first paycheck they started. So tonight, let's all agree, and we apparently are. Let's stand up for seniors. Stand up and show them. We will not cut Social Security. We will not cut Medicare. Those benefits belong to the American people. They earned it. And if anyone tries to cut Social Security, which apparently no one's going to do, and if anyone tries to cut Medicare, I'll stop them. I'll veto it. And look, I'm not going to allow them to be taken away. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. But apparently it's not going to be a problem. Next month, when I offer my fiscal plan, I ask my Republican friends to lay down their plan as well. I really mean it. Let's sit down together and discuss our mutual plans together. Let's do that. I can tell you, the plan I'm going to show you is going to cut the deficit by another $2 trillion. And it won't cut a single bit of Medicare or Social Security. In fact, we're going to extend the Medicare Trust Fund at least 2 decades, because that's going to be the next argument. How do we keep it solvent, right? Well, we'll not raise tax on anyone making under 400 grand, but we'll pay for it the way we talked about tonight, by making sure that the wealthy and big corporations pay their fair share. Look. Here's the deal. They aren't just taking advantage of the tax code. They're taking advantage of you, the American consumer. Here's my message to all of you out there. I have your back. We're already preventing Americans from receiving surprise medical bills, stopping $1 billion surprise bills per month so far. We're protecting seniors' life savings by cracking down on nursing homes that commit fraud, endanger patient safety, prescribe drugs that are not needed. Millions of Americans can now save thousands of dollars because they can finally get a hearing aid over the counter without a prescription. Look, capitalism without competition is not capitalism. It's extortion. It's exploitation. Last year, I cracked down with the help of many of you on foreign shipping companies that were making you pay higher prices for every good coming into the country. I signed a bipartisan bill to cut shipping costs by 90%, helping American farmers, businessmen, and consumers. Let's finish the job. Pass the bipartisan legislation to strengthen antitrust enforcement and prevent big online platforms from giving their own products an unfair advantage. My administration is also taking on junk fees, those hidden surcharges too many companies use to make you pay more. For example, we're making airlines show you the full ticket price up front, refund your money if your flight is canceled or delayed. We've reduced exorbitant bank overdrafts by saving consumers more than $1 billion a year. We're cutting credit card late fees by 75%, from $30 to $8. Look, junk fees may not matter to the very wealthy, but they matter to most other folks in homes like the one I grew up in, like many of you did. They add up to hundreds of dollars a month. They make it harder for you to pay your bills or afford that family trip. I know how unfair it feels when a company overcharges you and gets away with it. Not anymore. We've written a bill to stop it all. It's called the Junk Fee Prevention Act. We're going to ban surprise resort fees that hotels charge on your bill. Those fees can cost you up to $90 a night at hotels that aren't even resorts. The idea that cable, internet, and cell phone companies can charge you $200 or more if you decide to switch to another provider. Give me a break. We can stop service fees on tickets to concerts and sporting events and make companies disclose all the fees up front. And we'll prohibit airlines from charging $50 round trip for a family just to be able to sit together. Baggage fees are bad enough. Airlines can't treat your child like a piece of baggage. Americans are tired of being. We're tired of being played for suckers. So pass the Junk Fee Prevention Act so companies stop ripping us off. For too long, workers have been getting stiffed. but not anymore. We're beginning to restore the dignity of work. For example, I should have known this, but I didn't until 2 years ago. 30 million workers have to sign non-compete agreements for the jobs they take. 30 million. So a cashier at a burger place can't walk across town and take the same job at another burger place and make a few bucks more. It just changed. But they just changed it because we exposed it. That was part of the deal, guys. Look it up. But not anymore. We're banning those agreements so companies have to compete for workers and pay them what they're worth. And I must tell you, this is bound to get a response from my friends on my left but the right. I'm so sick and tired of companies breaking the law by preventing workers from organizing. Pass the PRO Act, because business have a right, workers have a right to form a union. And let's guarantee all workers have a living wage. Let's make sure working parents can afford to raise a family with sick days, paid family medical leave, affordable child care. That's going to enable millions of more people to go and stay at work. And let's restore the full child tax credit, which gave tens of millions of parents some breathing room and cut child poverty in half to the lowest level in history. And by the way, when we do all these things, we increase productivity. We increase economic growth. So let's finish the job and get more families access to affordable, quality housing. Let's get seniors who want to stay in their homes the care they need to do so. Let's give more breathing room to millions of family caregivers looking after their loved ones. Pass my plan so we get seniors and people with disabilities the home care and services they need. And support the workers who are doing God's work. These plans are fully paid for, and we can afford to do them. Restoring the dignity of work means making education an affordable ticket to the middle class. You know, when we made public education, 12 years of it, universal in the last century, we made the best educated, best paid, we became the best educated, best paid nation in the world. But the rest of the world's caught up. It's caught up. Jill, my wife, who teaches full time, has an expression. I hope I get it right, kid. Any nation that out-educates us is going to out-compete us. Any nation that out-educates is going to out-compete us. Folks, we all know 12 years of education is not enough to win the economic competition of the 21st century. We want to have the best educated workforce. Let's finish the job by providing access to preschool for 3 and 4 years old. Studies show that children who go to preschool are nearly 50% more likely to finish high school and go on to earn a 2- or 4-year degree, no matter their background they came from. Let's give public school teachers a raise. We're making progress by reducing student debt, increasing Pell Grants for working and middle-class families. Let's finish the job and connect students to career opportunities starting in high school. Provide access to 2 years of community college, the best career training in America, in addition to being a pathway to a 4-year degree. Let's offer every American a path to a good career, whether they go to college or not. And folks, in the midst of the COVID crisis, when schools were closed and we were shutting down everything, let's recognize how far we came in the fight against the pandemic itself. While the virus is not gone, thanks to the resilience of the American people and the ingenuity of medicine, we've broken the COVID grip on us. COVID deaths are down by 90%. We've saved millions of lives and opened up our country. We opened our country back up, and soon we'll end the public health emergency. But that's called a public health emergency. But we'll remember the toll and pain that's never going to go away. More than 1 million Americans lost their lives to COVID. 1 million. Families grieving, children orphaned, empty chairs at the dining room table constantly reminding you that she used to sit there. Remembering them, we remain vigilant. We still need to monitor dozens of variants and support new vaccines and treatments. So Congress needs to fund these efforts and keep America safe. And as we emerge from this crisis stronger, we're also got to double down on prosecuting criminals who stole relief money meant to keep workers and small businesses afloat. Before I came to office, you remember, during that campaign, the big issue was about inspector generals who would protect taxpayers' dollars who were sidelined. They were fired. Many people said, we don't need them. And fraud became rampant. Last year, I told you the watchdogs are back. Since then, we've recovered billions of taxpayers' dollars. Now let's triple the anti-fraud strike force going after these criminals, double the statute of limitations on these crimes, and crack down on identity fraud by criminal syndicates stealing billions of dollars from the American people. And the data shows that for every dollar we put into fighting fraud, the taxpayers get back at least 10 times as much. It matters. It matters. Look, COVID left its scars, like the spike in violent crime in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. We have an obligation to make sure all people are safe. Public safety depends on public trust, as all of us know. But too often that trust is violated. Joining us tonight are the parents of Tyree Nichols. Welcome. We had to bury Tyree last week. As many of you personally know, there's no words to describe the heartache or grief of losing a child. But imagine if you lost that child at the hands of the law. Imagine having to worry whether your son or daughter came home from walking down the street, playing in the park, or just driving a car. Most of us in here have never had to have the talk that brown and black parents have had to have with their children. Bo, Hunter, Ashley, my children. I never had to have the talk with them. I never had to tell them if a police officer pulls you over, turn your interior lights on right away. Don't reach for your license. Keep your hands on the steering wheel. Imagine having to worry like that every single time your kid got in a car. Here's what Tyree's mother shared with me when I spoke to her. When I asked her how she finds the courage to carry on and speak out. With the faith of God, she said her son was, quote, a beautiful soul, and something good will come of this. Imagine how much courage and character that takes. It's up to us, to all of us. We all want the same thing. Neighborhoods free of violence. Law enforcement who earns the community's trust. Just as every cop, when they pin on that badge in the morning, has a right to be able to go home at night, so does everybody else out there. Our children have a right to come home safely. Equal protection under the law is a covenant we have with each other in America. We know police officers put their lives on the line every single night and day. And we know we ask them in many cases to do too much, to be counselors, social workers, psychologists, responding to drug overdoses, mental health crises, and so much more. In one sense, we ask much too much of them. I know most cops and their families are good, decent, honorable people, the vast majority. But they risk and they risk their lives every time they put that shield on. But what happened to Tyre in Memphis happens too often. We have to do better. Give law enforcement the real training they need. Hold them to higher standards. Help them succeed in keeping us safe. We also need more first responders and professionals to address the growing mental health, substance abuse challenges. More resources to reduce violent crime and gun crime. More community intervention programs. More investment in housing, education, and job training. All this can help prevent violence in the first place. And when police officers or police departments violate the public trust, they must be held accountable. With the support of the families of victims, civil rights groups, and law enforcement, I signed an executive order for all federal officers, banning chokeholds, restricting no-knock warrants, and other key elements of the George Floyd Act. Let's commit ourselves to make the words of Tyler's mom true. Something good must come from this. Something good. And all of us, folks, it's difficult, but it's simple. All of us in this chamber, we need to rise to this moment. We can't turn away. Let's do what we know in our hearts that we need to do. Let's come together to finish the job on police reform. Do something. Do something. That was the plea of parents who lost their children in Uvalde. I met with every one of them. Do something about gun violence. Thank God. Thank God we did. Passing the most sweeping gun safety law in 3 decades. That includes things like that the majority of responsible gun owners already support. Enhanced background checks for 18 to 21 years old. Red flag laws, keeping guns out of the hands of people who are a danger to themselves and others. But we know our work is not done. Joining us tonight is Brandon Say, a 26-year-old hero. Brandon put his college dreams on hold to be at his mom's side. His mom's side when she was dying from cancer. And Brandon now works at the dance studio started by his grandparents. And 2 weeks ago, during the Lunar New Year celebrations, he heard the studio door close, and he saw a man standing there pointing a semi-automatic pistol at him. He thought he was going to die, but he thought about the people inside. And in that instant, he found the courage to act and wrestled a semi-automatic pistol away from the gunman who had already killed 11 people in another dance studio. 11. He saved lives. It's time we do the same. Ban assault weapons now. Ban them now. Once and for all. I led the fight to do that in 1994. And in 10 years, that ban was law and mass shootings went down. After we let it expire in the Republican administration, mass shootings tripled. Let's finish the job and ban these assault weapons. And let's also come together on immigration. Make it a bipartisan issue once again. We know we now have a record number of personnel working to secure the border, arresting 8,000 human smugglers, seizing over 23,000 pounds of fentanyl in just the last several months. We've launched a new border plan last month. Unlawful migration from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela has come down 97% as a consequence of that. But American border problems won't be fixed until Congress acts. If we don't pass my comprehensive immigration reform, at least pass my plan to provide the equipment and officers to secure the border. And a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those on temporary status, farm workers, essential workers. Here in the People's House, it's our duty to protect all the people's rights and freedoms. Congress must restore the right and the Congress must restore the right that was taken away in Roe v. Wade and protect Roe v. Wade. Give every woman a consular right. The Vice President and I are doing everything to protect access to reproductive health care and safeguard patient safety. But already more than a dozen states are enforcing extreme abortion bans. Make no mistake about it. If Congress passes a national ban, I will veto it. But let's also pass the Bipartisan Equality Act to ensure LGBTQ Americans, especially transgender young people, can live with safety and dignity. Our strength is not just the example of our power, but the power of our example. Let's remember the world's watching. I spoke in this chamber 1 year ago, just days after Vladimir Putin unleashed his brutal attack against Ukraine. A murderous assault, evoking images of death and destruction Europe suffered in World War II. Putin's invasion has been a test for the ages, a test for America, a test for the world. Would we stand for the most basic of principles? Would we stand for sovereignty? Would we stand for the right of people to live free of tyranny? Would we stand for the defense of democracy? For such defense matters to us because it keeps peace and prevents open season on would-be aggressors and threatens our prosperity. 1 year later, we know the answer. Yes, we would, and we did. We did. And together, we did what America always does at our best. We led. We united NATO. We built a global coalition. We stood against Putin's aggression. We stood with the Ukrainian people. Tonight, we're once again joined by Ukraine's ambassador to the United States. She represents not just her nation, but the courage of her people. Our ambassador is here, we're united in our support of your country. Will you stand so we can all take a look at you? Thank you. Because we're going to stand with you as long as it takes. Our nation is working for more freedom, more dignity, more peace, not just in Europe, but everywhere. Before I came to office, the story was about how the People's Republic of China was increasing its power and America was failing in the world. Not anymore. We made clear, and I made clear in my personal conversations, which have been many, with President Xi, that we seek competition, not conflict. But I will make no apologies that we're investing to make America stronger. Investing in American innovation and industries that will define the future that China intends to be dominating. Investing in our alliances and working with our allies to protect advanced technologies so they will not be used against us. Modernizing our military to safeguard stability and deter aggression. Today, we're in the strongest position in decades to compete with China or anyone else in the world. Anyone else in the world. And I'm committed. I'm committed to work with China where we can advance American interests and benefit the world. But make no mistake about it. As we made clear last week, if China threatens our sovereignty, We will act to protect our country, and we did. Look, let's be clear. Winning the competition should unite all of us. We face serious challenges across the world. But in the past 2 years, democracies have become stronger, not weaker. Autocracies have grown weaker, not stronger. Name me a world leader who changed places with Xi Jinping. Name me one. Name me one. America's rallying the world to meet those challenges, from climate to global health, to food insecurity, to terrorism, to territorial aggression. Allies are stepping up, spending more, and doing more. Look, the bridges we're forming between partners in the Pacific and those in the Atlantic, and those who bet against America are learning how wrong they are. It's never, ever been a good bet to bet against America. Never. Well, when I came to office, most assured that bipartisanship assumed was impossible, but never believed it. That's why a year ago I offered a unity agenda to the nation as I stood here. We made real progress together. We passed a law making it easy for doctors to prescribe effective treatments for opioid addiction. We passed the gun safety law, making historic investments in mental health. We launched the ARPA-H drive for breakthrough in the fights against cancer, Alzheimer's, and diabetes, and so much more. We passed the Heath Robinson PACT Act, named after the late Iraq War veteran whose story about exposure to toxic burn kits I shared here last year. I understand something about those burn pits, but there's so much more to do. We can do it together. Joining us tonight is a father named Doug from Newton, New Hampshire. He wrote Jill, my wife, a letter, and me as well, about his courageous daughter, Courtney. A contagious laugh, his sister's best friend, her sister's best friend. He shared the story all too familiar to millions of Americans and many of you in the audience. Courtney discovered pills in high school. It spiraled into addiction and eventually death from a fentanyl overdose. She was just 20 years old. Describing the last 8 years without her, Doug said, "There's no worse pain." Yet their family has turned pain to purpose, working to end the stigma and change laws. He told us he wants to start a journey toward American recovery. Doug, we're with you. Fentanyl is killing more than 70,000 Americans a year. Big, you got it. So let's launch a major surge to stop fentanyl production and the sale and trafficking, with more drug detection machines, inspection cargo, stop pills and powder at the border. Working with couriers like FedEx to inspect more packages for drugs. Strong penalties to crack down on fentanyl trafficking. Second, let's do more on mental health, especially for our children. When millions of young people are struggling with bullying, violence, trauma, we owe them greater access to mental health care at their schools. We must finally hold social media companies accountable for experimenting they're doing running children for profit. It's time to pass bipartisan legislation to stop big tech from collecting personal data on our kids and teenagers online, ban targeted advertising to children, and impose stricter limits on the personal data that companies collect on all of us. Third, let's do more to keep this nation's one truly sacred obligation, to equip those we send into harm's way and care for them and their families when they come home. Job training, job placement for veterans and their spouses as they come to return to civilian life. Helping veterans afford the rent because no one should be homeless in America, especially someone who served the country. Dennis McDonough is here of the VA. We had a first real discussion when I asked him to take the job. I'm glad he did. We were losing up to 25 veterans a day on suicide. Now we're losing 17 a day to the silent scourge of suicide. 17 veterans a day are committing suicide. More than all the people being killed in the wars. Folks, VA is doing everything it can, including expanding mental health screening, proven programs that recruits veterans to help other veterans understand what they're going through, get them the help they need. We got to do more. And fourth, last year, Jill and I reignited the cancer moonshot that I was able to start with President Obama asked me to lead our administration on this issue. Our goal is to cut the cancer death rates at least by 50% in the next 25 years. Turn more cancers from death sentences to treatable diseases. Provide more support for patients and their families. It's personal to so many of us in this audience. Joining us are Morris and Candice, an Irishman and a daughter of immigrants from Panama. They met and fell in love in New York City and got married in the same chapel Jill and I got married in New York City. Kindred spirits. He wrote us a letter about his little daughter, Ava, and I saw her just before I came over. She was just a year old when she was diagnosed with rare kidney disease, cancer. After 26 blood transfusions, 11 rounds of radiation, 8 rounds of chemo, 1 kidney removed, giving a 5% survival rate. He wrote how in the darkest moments he thought, if she goes, I can't stay. Many of you have been through that as well. Jill and I understand that like so many of you. And he read Jill's book describing our family's cancer journey and how we tried to steal moments of joy where we could with Bo. For them, that glimmer of joy was the half smile of their baby girl. It meant everything to them. They never gave up hope. Little Ava never gave up hope. She turns 4 next month. They just found out Ava's beating the odds, is on her way to being cured of cancer. And she's watching from the White House tonight if she's not asleep already. For the lives we can save, for the lives we can save and the lives we've lost, let this be a truly American moment that rallies the country and the world together and proves that we can still do big things. 20 years ago, under the leadership of President Bush and countless advocates and champions, he undertook a bipartisan effort through PEPFAR to transform the global fight against HIV/AIDS. It's been a huge success. He thought big. He thought large. He moved. I believe we can do the same thing with cancer. Let's end cancer as we know it. Cure some cancers once and for all. Folks, there's one reason why we've been able to do all of these things. Our democracy itself. It's the most fundamental thing of all. With democracy, everything's possible. Without it, nothing is. For the last few years, our democracy has been threatened and attacked, put at risk, put to the test in this very room on January the 6th. And then just a few months ago, an unhinged big lie assailed and unleashed a political violence, the home of the then Speaker of the House of Representatives, using the very same language the insurrectionists used as they stalked these halls and chanted on January 6th. Here tonight in this chamber is a man who bears the scars of that brutal attack, but is as tough and as strong, as resilient as they get. My friend Paul Pelosi. Paul, stand up. that such a heinous act should have never happened. We must all speak out. There's no place for political violence in America. We have to protect the right to vote, not suppress the fundamental right. Honor the results of our elections, not subvert the will of the people. We have to uphold the rule of law and restore trust in our institutions of democracy. And we must give hate and extremism in any form no safe harbor. Democracy must not be a partisan issue. It's an American issue. Every generation of Americans has faced a moment where they have been called to protect our democracy, defend it, stand up for it. And this is our moment. My fellow Americans, we meet tonight at an inflection point, one of those moments that only a few generations ever face, where the direction we now take is going to decide the course of this nation for decades to come. We're not bystanders of history. We're not powerless before the forces that confront us. It's within our power of we, the people. We're facing the test of our time. We have to be the nation we've always been at our best, optimistic, hopeful, forward-looking. A nation that embraces light over dark, hope over fear, unity over division, stability over chaos. We have to see each other not as enemies, but as fellow Americans. We're good people. The only nation in the world built on an idea, the only one. Other nations are defined by geography, ethnicity, but we're the only nation based on an idea that all of us, every one of us, is created equal in the image of God. A nation that stands as a beacon to the world. A nation in a new age of possibilities. So I've come to fulfill my constitutional obligation to report in the State of the Union. And here's my report. Because the soul of this nation is strong, because the backbone of this nation is strong, because the people of this nation are strong, the State of the Union is strong. I'm not new to this place. I stand here tonight having served as long as about any one of you have ever served here. But I've never been more optimistic about our future, about the future of America. We just have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America, and there's nothing beyond our capacity if we do it together. God bless you all, and may God protect our truth. Thank you.
All right, this is Andrew Kraft here. You have been listening in to President Biden deliver his State of the Union address to the nation, going well over an hour here as he touched on numerous different topics, part of his agenda. But the theme seems to be, let's finish the job. Of course, now all indications point to a pending announcement on his reelection plans. But let's talk about what was said. Let's go over some of the key highlights as we await for the GOP response that's going to be given by Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders as well. Let's bring into the conversation former Biden senior campaign advisor, founder of Public-Private Strategies, Rhett Buttle. Rhett, thanks so much for being with us. What did you make of this? It was longer than I thought. I was struck by the fact that the very first thing he did in this speech, extend a handshake to new Speaker Kevin McCarthy, kind of an avenue to working together. Do you think it sticks?
Look, I mean, this is not uncharacteristic of Joe Biden. He's a creature of the Senate, as we've talked about. He long has talked about working across the aisle. And we saw just in the last Congress, he passed two major pieces of legislation that were bipartisan. I mean, more pieces of legislation if you look at them all, but two huge, significant ones. It's reported that he and the Speaker had a good meeting on the debt ceiling limit. I think it was cordial. I think they're, trying to restore order. So I think, I think we all hope it sticks, because I think it's best when you see two sides coming together to work on serious issues. Now, while I think there's disagreements, I think there is a lot of area of compromise, so that's good. I think the big piece we heard from the president tonight is that he reported how strong the economy is, talking about how we're coming out of the pandemic. But I think he recognizes that still too many working families are, having challenges, and that the job's not done. There's still work to do. And while there's been a lot of progress made over the next 2 years, he fully intends to move forward over the next 2 years, making the lives of working families and small businesses across the country easier.
Yeah, Red, as we just watch President Biden kind of do what he does best, gland hand with people he's worked with for so long. You mentioned it first, though. That was quite a contentious exchange when President Biden was talking about what to do about the debt ceiling and whether or not Republicans are going to carry on with some of their ideas about cutting spending. That was the common refrain in that exchange. Medicare, Social Security off the table. He kind of put the ball in Republicans' court there, but it got pretty heated.
I mean, I think what he did was kind of brilliant, actually. I mean, he kind of locked the Republican Party into basically saying that they're not going to make cuts to Social Security and Medicare. And I think, that's often the case. It'll be interesting. We have this sort of faction of the Republican Party, the sort of ultra MAGA part of the Republican Party, which, Speaker McCarthy's having trouble controlling, right? This is the wing of the party that led to 15 rounds of him before getting the vote. And I think you see the more moderate members of the Republican Party understand sort of the challenges with making cuts to Social Security and Medicare and how important it is to so many seniors and people across our country. But the reality is there's this strong faction of sort of ultra MAGA Republicans growing in the Republican base, and they are requiring I think, the speaker to sort of move out of normal procedure. One of the things I think we also saw the president do is he said cleanly, historically, this has not been an issue. Let's raise the debt ceiling limit. This is a procedural vote. And that's how it's been generally. And I think that that's how we should think about it. It's really important from an economic perspective that the U.S. obviously not default on its debt, or we send the wrong indicators that we're willing to do so. And so there's an opportunity there for bipartisanship, but I think the question will be, can Speaker McCarthy get the more extreme member of his caucus in line to be able to do so, so that it creates the way for a bipartisan relationship on other conversations and other policy areas.
Okay, Red, let's just listen in briefly as the president kind of has these conversations. It's always interesting to see who he's speaking with, who he's not speaking with.
God bless you, Mr. President.
You're still playing, huh? Let me know. You got guns as big as my thigh.
Joe, we love you. Memphis needs everything it can get.
I know.
We got problems.
I know you do. I've been
Wonderful. Big speech.
Sorry you guys had to sit there. I apologize. Nice to see you, Mr. President.
Okay, shaking the hands of some of the Supreme Court justices not in attendance tonight, Justices Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas. There you see retired Justice Breyer and retired Justice Anthony Kennedy.
You proposed, he said, read off the list of names. He read the foremost conservative justices in Arizona. He said, look at Ireland. It's a true story. And I said, you're for him. I said, no, I don't know enough.
Okay, definitely read something you don't see every day, kind of the president talking with former retired Supreme Court justices. Let's get back, though, into the debt ceiling kind of part of this speech. And you saw time and again when President Biden said something that House Republicans didn't agree with, Kevin McCarthy smirking behind him on the dais, but also kind of making a nod for members of his caucus to, calm down, don't show these emotions. But President Biden said about the debt ceiling, he wanted everyone in the chamber there to commit there tonight to the full faith and credit of the United States, that it never be questioned. This is really the biggest matchup for the new majority and the Biden White House, and it's kind of piecemeal manifesting itself, is it not?
Well, the first thing I wanted to say is I've never, all folks who are in politics love a rope line, but in particular, President Joe Biden, he just loves people, and that's real people. And I've just seen him at so many events, engage with real people, talk and listen to them. Obviously, tonight is filled with, Supreme Court members and Congress people, but, this is such a special moment for him, and I think a moment where he really shines just relating to people one-on-one. And we heard him talk a lot about, the importance of people and people's lives and his experience growing up a working family. And so I think we see him live and in real action tonight. As it relates to the debt limit, I agree with you. I think this is an important moment that will forge the relationship between the speaker and the president going forward. We have never defaulted on our debt limit. If we did so, it would be disastrous to our economy and create a lot of downward effects that would not be positive, especially when we're in this moment of economic recovery. And in general, this has been something, and as the president talked about, the last three sort of votes on this have been rather procedural. And generally, whenever a party, one party is in power, it's been able to do so. And in the past, it's been able to do so quite bipartisanly. And over the last few years, as we've seen sort of a more extreme wing of the Republican Party form, they've really used this to sort of hold it as hostage and sort of as a leverage. And I think the reality is this is a very serious issue. We're talking about the full faith and credit of the United States. And while I think the president is very open to conversation on a host of bipartisan issues, this moment is not the right moment to do so. And so we'll be curious. I think it's more a leadership lesson for Speaker McCarthy and whether he'll be able to actually control his caucus. But I do think how this all plays out will shape the relationship between the White House and the House of Representatives over the next 2 years.
Okay, Rhett, let's keep talking about the economy, talking about energy as well. I thought this was interesting. Biden essentially said that when you talk about energy, oil, and gas exploration, we're going to need, essentially, he said, I'm paraphrasing, fossil fuels for some time. Do you think that'll rankle part of his left flank?
Well, I think, we heard from the president is the economy is strong, right? So we, had a gangbusters jobs report. One of the things that really excites me as someone who does a lot of work in the small business community is the record number of small business starts that are up. So, we're dealing with a fairly, strong economy, but I think he also realizes that there are still some challenges for consumers, right? And while inflation has come down over the last few months, just a little bit more for working families is always helpful. And so I think as he's thinking about energy, that's the president has always been someone who is rather pragmatic on these issues. And, the Inflation Reduction Act is the largest investment in climate change in our country. And I think he's also mapping out and showing that he's realistic about what that transition looks like. And so I think that's what we heard from the president was a full embrace of the important steps that the Inflation Reduction Act makes and sort of this investment in moving us towards a more clean energy economy. But I think he also recognizes that policy takes time, and it takes time for these market incentives to be able to change the economy. And so I think that that's what the president was trying to make out tonight when he was speaking to the American people.
Yeah, he said essentially we're still going to need oil and gas for a while. He also made it quite a point in the speech, and he kind of, in his natural posture, he hunkers down, he grips the podium there and almost whispers. He said, the tax system is not fair. He made a number of proposals about taxing more wealthy Americans. What did he say?
Well, look, I think the president's always been clear. If you make below $400,000 in America, you will not pay one more penny in taxes. And the reality is the vast majority of Americans, whether you're a small business owner or a working family, does not make $400,000 a year. And so he's very focused on protecting the middle class and those who are striving to get into the middle class with this tax policy. But the reality is the tax system for far too long has been rigged towards large corporations and wealthy individuals. The tax law that was passed under President Trump gave the largest extension of tax cuts to corporations that it's ever given. In fairness, that law actually had a number of tax cuts that I think were good for small business. But the reality is the vast majority of the small business tax cuts expire in 2025, and the tax cuts for the large corporations continue to exist in perpetuity. And as the president talks about it, it's not fair that a working class person, whether it be a nurse or a teacher or someone, pay a higher rate of their income, right, than someone who is a millionaire or billionaire. And we've seen people who are quite wealthy in this country take advantage of the tax system. And so I think he's focused on how do we make the tax system more equitable. He's been very focused and clear. He's a capitalist. He believes if you work hard, you should be able to reap the benefits of wealth in our country. But we also have to reward the working class people who've built America. And the vast majority of people I talk to, whether they're small business owners or working families, they make below $400,000 a year. I think statistically that is well over 90% of Americans. And so he's really talking about sort of aimed at a specific portion of people who've used the tax system to gimmick and really not pay their fair share of taxes over the years.
Yeah, one of the proposals he's making, he said no billionaire should pay a lower tax rate than a teacher or a firefighter. He said billion-dollar companies based here who have that as their profit margin need to pay a minimum 15%. So we'll see, I guess, how Wall Street responds to some of that. He also said he wants to quadruple the tax on stock buybacks. Is that going to be easy?
Look, I think these are, different proposals aimed at, leveling the playing field and just making the playing field more fair. As I mentioned, I work with a lot of small business owners, and they often they say, we don't want a tax advantage. We just want a level playing field. But the reality is right now the playing field is not stacked against them. And we've seen a lot of corporations, because of how they're structured and the work that they do globally, been able to, set up systems that have allowed them to bypass, systems here, allow them to be able to compensate high-level paid individuals in different ways. And a lot of that has led to a loss of revenue and the ability to make sure that funding is going into important things that we need to do as a society. And so I think, the administration is looking at creative ways to be able to, signal to corporate America that they want to have a serious conversation about tax equity and make sure that, small businesses and working families are being treated the same way that large corporations are.
Yeah, one of the other major touting proposals that he was talking about at length was a bipartisan infrastructure law. He also made news. He said all construction materials to be used in federal infrastructure projects under that law need to be made and produced in America. And so he was constantly with this refrain, build in America, made in America. He was touting the CHIPS and Science bill as well to shore up domestic manufacturing of semiconductor chips. So there was a lot of accomplishments there. Republicans kind of not, taking that bait. They weren't standing up and clapping, especially for the CHIPS Act. But with this bipartisan infrastructure law, President Biden said Republicans who voted for it and against it, still touting, kind of tongue-in-cheek there.
Yeah, look, I think he's trying to draw a contrast. I mean, the reality is both the bipartisan infrastructure law and the CHIPS and Sciences Act were passed with strong bipartisan support. And the reality is these are laws that not only make investments at home, they make us more competitive abroad. And I think the president is laser-like focused on not only making sure that we're creating jobs here in America, but America is competitive for the long term. And I think that these two laws in tandem, and I would add the Inflation Reduction Act and pieces of the American Rescue Plan, which are two pieces of legislation that don't get talked about as much, I think are all part of sort of this agenda of making America competitive and building here at home. And the reality is we saw a lot of people who supported these ideas and concepts, some people who voted for them or quite frankly voted against it. They get really excited when a bridge is repaired in their community, and they're showing up at the ribbon cutting ceremonies and taking credit for it when the reality was they didn't vote for it. And so, I think a lot of us who've, worked in Washington have applauded the bipartisan nature of a number of these laws. And so they're a nice testament to showing that, government can work when there's strong areas of consensus around things like infrastructure and making America competitive. And so I think most of the focus here, is really on making sure that folks know about these laws as they're being implemented, as jobs start to get created and funding starts to flow down in their communities.
Okay, Rhett, so we're waiting for the GOP response still going to be given by Arkansas Governor Sarah Huckabee Sanders. President Biden's still in the House chamber, speaking with members, and we've been listening into some of their conversations. One I heard as well saying that Memphis needs help, Rhett. We also saw the parents, or at least the mother and stepfather of Tyre Nichols. They stood and the whole chamber applauded. And he touted that he signed an executive order for federal officers banning chokeholds, restricting no-knock warrants. That was done at the executive level. Not much movement yet on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. It seems like conversations, though, are being resurrected. And he said, essentially, that we're going to do as much as it takes. He said something good must come from this, meaning the Tyre Nichols horrible, savage beating. But that piece of legislation, Rhett, that is not operative at the moment. I mean, it could be reintroduced, but it is dead right now.
It sounds like there's some positive conversations happening in the Senate about what a piece of legislation might look like. I think what you've seen is you've seen the president do what he can do with executive authority. I don't think this is the end of that. I think the administration will continue to think about what they can do. You know, there's a lot that they can do, not only with their authority, but quite frankly, with their ability to convene people, bring people together, have conversations, talk to leaders, business leaders, community leaders. I think we will see a lot of that in the coming months. But none of that should negate the need for legislation in this area. And I think we have faced too many unfortunate situations, particularly in Black and Latino communities, where this issue is just continuing to rise and we need congressional action. And so I think what you heard the president do is really try to highlight this issue for Congress. And a lot of times, you know, what the president, any president will do is sort of use the State of the Union to highlight these key critical issues that are so important to communities, to talk about them as priorities. And so I think it was intentional that he talked about it tonight. To make sure that people know that he's taking steps himself, but also to add some pressure to Congress to say this is an important priority. This is an area where we can work together. And I think folks are encouraged by conversations that are going on in the Senate. There's some bipartisan conversations happening led by Senator Scott. So fingers crossed there that continues to make movement and that they're able to make some progress.
Right. I mean, you've watched numerous State of the Unions over your career. You kind of specialist in business, in the economy. What struck out to you? I mean, to me, having watched this was kind of your cookie cutter, State of the Union address, not many new policy proposals, going over perceived legislative accomplishments. For me, he did mention China, and he was, and you can argue if he was strong or not. I would imagine Republicans on the other side of the aisle didn't think he was as strong as he should have been. He said, today we're in our strongest position to compete against China. He says, if China threatens our sovereignty, we'll act to protect our country. And we did. So he didn't mention the balloon outright, but that was a pretty heavy-handed allusion there, right?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think, the president, took all the details about the situation and took action and took advice from our military. And it was funny because earlier in the week, a lot of Republicans were saying, why doesn't he just shoot down the balloon? And I think what we learned is, A, he did take action over the weekend, but B, obviously they were able to work with the military to do so in a way that made sense, that allowed them to gain as much insight into what was going on. I think, what really stood out to me, I think, about this State of the Union is, we've gone through something historic. I think so many of us have kind of already forgotten that, we lived through a once-in-a-generation pandemic. And so really watching the American economy come back and sort of how you rebuild the American economy coming out of a global health pandemic is such a unique situation. And America is such a leader in the world, and so many people look to our market and our ability to innovate in our economy. And so to watch the president really talk about where we are today economically versus where we are 2 years ago, but also say, like, we haven't made all the progress we want to do. There's more work to do, but here's the things we've said. I think that is sort of the big takeaway for me of this. And part of that is not only here at home, but saying, look, we made an investment in down payment now. We have more work to do, but we're also setting America up for generations, both on the education side and the workforce side and the ability to compete. And so, he's balancing the priorities of what are the urgent needs of now, but also the work of making sure America is set up for the long haul, both economically and also around issues of democracy, as we work to, create a more perfect union and strengthen our consensus process of working together.
Yeah, let's just listen in to Kevin McCarthy here, the speaker. Okay, looks like Speaker McCarthy gaveling out the session there on the House floor. We have a number of tweets, Rhett, that we want to get to, just a lot of reaction from lawmakers as well. This from Republican Senator from Iowa, Chuck Grassley. He says he agrees with President Biden. We must lower insulin costs for pharmaceutical pricing reform must be part of the solution. Powerful middlemen, called PBMs, continue to operate in the shadows and drive up costs. My partisan Prescription Pricing for the People Act and PBM Transparency Act put sunshine on PBMs and hold them accountable. So he's agreeing in somewhat there. President Biden touting that they did bring down the costs of prescription drugs for a specific subset of the population, $35. Grassley saying that he agrees in part.
Yeah, so PBM is a pharmacy benefit manager. I had 2 years of working at the Department of Health and Human Services, so this is actually an area I'm quite familiar with. Look, I think there are lots of opportunities to work bipartisanly on healthcare, and Senator Grassley has been a pretty decent partner with Democrats on finding areas of common solution. I think everyone agrees, whether you talk to a working family or you talk to a small business owner who's trying to make payroll, the cost of healthcare in America, while we have exceptional healthcare as it relates to the rest of the world, is just too costly for working class families to be able to afford. And so I think he's pointing to the fact here that, you know, there are a lot of players in the healthcare system. And so when you break it down, you have hospitals, you have providers, you have health insurance companies, you have these pharmacies, pharmacy benefit managers. And he's talking about a specific sort of intervention that he's focused on. But I think more importantly, the context of the tweet is saying, hey, look, there's an area together here on healthcare cost, and you know, it's a positive sign, I think, from the Republican side that there might be an opportunity to work together beyond just the issue of insulin, which is obviously such a critical issue for so many Americans, and I think that that identifies with so many people, which is why we heard the president talk about it. But I think there's a broader conversation to be had around the cost of healthcare and the cost of the high cost of drugs.
But I just want to get you to respond to some of these tweets from House Republicans, including Jim Jordan. And he brought up kind of some of the approval or disapproval of President Biden. He said, if Joe Biden's economy is so good, why do over 70% of Americans think our country is on the wrong track? The finish the job narrative juxtaposed with some of these favorability and disfavorability ratings, they seem to be out of sync here. And so help us explain that. Now, the president, we're told, is going to be announcing sometime after this speech was made for re-election. So that is set up as well for the next 2 years, but also possibly for the next 4 years. Do you think he sold that message to the American people, even with these numbers of approval?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, obviously, I don't know where Jim Jordan's polls are from. You can pull lots of polls from different places. And I think particularly in Washington, we see a lot of polling and research from organizations that have sort of a left-leaning point of view or a right-leaning point of view. And so Jim Jordan is obviously one of the fiercest opponents of Democrats and the president. So I'm not sure that that his characterization is a fair characterization. What I will say is that, I think it takes time a lot of times when you pass these big pieces of laws for the American public to feel it or to sort of contextualize it. And so that's why moments like the State of the Union are so important, because it gives the president an opportunity to talk about the state of progress that they've made on the economy and how far we've come. But I think if you really do look back and you talk to your average person about where we were 2 years ago, where most of us were wearing masks and maybe not the ability to go into the office or get on a plane, people are starting to travel again. A lot of people are going back to work if they wish to do so. We're seeing more small businesses creating. We're seeing a lot of entrepreneurship. So I think it's really an unfair characterization to say that the world is not better than it was a few years ago, because I think most people are beginning to return to somewhat of a similar life to what they had 2 years ago, and that is a huge, vast improvement.
That's, of course, what President Biden said, that COVID does not rule our lives anymore. Live now look there right outside of the Arizona governor's mansion. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the governor, speaking right now for the GOP response.
Taught me not to believe every story I hear. So forgive me for not believing much of anything I heard tonight from President Biden. From out-of-control inflation and violent crime to the dangerous border crisis and threat from China. Biden and the Democrats have failed you. They know it, and you know it. And it's time for a change. Tonight, let us reaffirm our commitment to a timeless American idea that government exists not to rule the people, but to serve the people. Democrats want to rule us with more government control, but that's not who we are. America is the greatest country the world has ever known because we're the freest country the world has ever known, with a people who are strong and resilient. 5 months ago, I was diagnosed with thyroid cancer. It was a hard time for our family, particularly our kids, Scarlett, Huck, and George. But we kept our faith and persevered. Thanks to exceptional doctors here in Arkansas, a successful surgery, and the grace of God, I am cancer-free. Through it all, I couldn't help but think about my mom. She was 20 years old and in her first year of marriage when she was diagnosed with spinal cancer. The doctors told her she might not live, and if she did live, they said she'd never walk again. And if she did walk, she'd definitely never have children. The daughter she was told she'd never have was just sworn in as the new governor of Arkansas and is speaking to you tonight. Adversity and fear of the unknown can paralyze us, but faith propels us to charge boldly ahead. We can't stand still in the face of great challenges. You and I were put on this earth for such a time as this, to charge boldly ahead. I'll be the first to admit, President Biden and I don't have a lot in common. I'm for freedom, he's for government control. At 40, I'm the youngest governor in the country. And at 80, he's the oldest president in American history. I'm the first woman to lead my state, and he's the first man to surrender his presidency to a woke mob that can't even tell you what a woman is. In the radical left's America, Washington taxes you and lights your hard-earned money on fire. But you get crushed with high gas prices, empty grocery shelves, and our children are taught to hate one another on account of their race, but not to love one another or our great country. Whether Joe Biden believes this madness or is simply too weak to resist it, his administration has been completely hijacked by the radical left. The dividing line in America is no longer between right or left. The choice is between normal or crazy. It's time for a new generation of Republican leadership. Upon taking office just a few weeks ago, I signed executive orders to ban CRT, racism, and indoctrination in our schools, eliminate the use of derogatory term Latinx in our government, repealed COVID orders, and said never again to authoritarian mandates and shutdowns. Americans want common sense from their leaders, but in Washington, the Biden administration is doubling down on crazy. President Biden inherited the fastest economic recovery on record, the most secure border in history, cheap, abundant, homegrown energy, fast rising wages, a rebuilt military, and a world that was stable and at peace. But over the last 2 years, Democrats destroyed it all. Despite Democrats' trillions in reckless spending and mountains of debt, we now have the worst border crisis in American history. As a mom, my heart breaks for every parent who has lost a son or daughter to addiction. 100,000 Americans a year are now killed from drug overdoses, largely from fentanyl pouring across our southern border. Yet the Biden administration refuses to secure the border and save American lives. And after years of Democrat attacks on law enforcement and calls to defund the police, violent criminals roam free, while law-abiding families live in fear. Beyond our border, from Afghanistan to Ukraine, from North Korea to Iran, President Biden's weakness puts our nation and the world at risk. And the president's refusal to stand up to China, our most formidable adversary, is dangerous and unacceptable. President Biden is unwilling to defend our border defend our skies, and defend our people. He is simply unfit to serve as commander-in-chief. And while you reap the consequences of their failures, the Biden administration seems more interested in woke fantasies than the hard reality Americans face every day. Most Americans simply want to live their lives in freedom and peace. But we are under attack in a left-wing culture war we didn't start and never wanted to fight. Every day we are told we must partake in their rituals, salute their flags, and worship their false idols, all while big government colludes with big tech to strip away the most American thing there is, your freedom of speech. That's not normal. It's crazy, and it's wrong. Make no mistake, Republicans will not surrender this fight. We will lead with courage and do what's right, not what's politically correct or convenient. Republicans believe in an America where strong families thrive in safe communities, where jobs are abundant and paychecks are rising, where the freedom our veterans shed their blood to defend is the birthright of every man, woman, and child. These are the principles Republican governors are fighting for, and in Washington, under the leadership of Senate Republicans and Speaker Kevin McCarthy, we will hold the Biden administration accountable. Down the street from where I sit is my alma mater, Little Rock Central High. As a student there, I will never forget watching my dad, Governor Mike Huckabee, and President Bill Clinton hold the doors open to the Little Rock Nine. Doors that 40 years earlier had been closed to them because they were Black. Today, those children once barred from the schoolhouse are now heroes memorialized in bronze at our State House. I'm proud of the progress our country has made, and I believe giving every child access to a quality education, regardless of their race or income, is the civil rights issue of our day. Tomorrow, I will unveil an education package that will be the most far-reaching, bold, conservative education reform in the country. My plan empowers parents with real choices, improves literacy and career readiness, and helps put a good teacher in every classroom by increasing their starting salary from one of the lowest to one of the highest in the nation. Here in Arkansas and across America, Republicans are working to end the policy of trapping kids in failing schools and sentencing them to a lifetime of poverty. We will educate, not indoctrinate our kids, and put students on a path to success. It's time for a new generation to lead. This is our moment. This is our opportunity. A new generation born in the waning decades of the last century, shaped by economic booms and stock market busts, forged by the triumph of the Cold War and the tragedy of 9/11. A generation brimming with passion and new ideas to solve age-old problems. A generation moored to our deepest values and oldest traditions, yet unafraid to challenge the present order and find a better way forward. If we seize this moment together, America can once again be the land of the free and the home of the brave. During my 2.5 years at the White House, I traveled on every foreign trip with the president. A trip I will never forget was on December 25th of 2018. My husband Brian and I had just cleaned up wrapping paper that was shoved into every corner of our house, thanks to our 3 kids. When I had to walk out on my own family's Christmas, unable to tell them where I was going that night, because the place I'd be traveling was so dangerous, they didn't want anybody to know that the president was going to be on the ground, even for a few hours. We boarded Air Force One in complete and total darkness. There were no lights on the plane, no lights on the runway. Our phones and computers shut down and turned in. We were going completely off the grid. Nearly 12 hours later, in the pitch black of night, we landed in the war-torn part of western Iraq. It was again a similar scene. No lights on the plane, no lights on the runway. The only thing you could see was coming from about a mile away in a dining hall where hundreds of troops who were in the fight against ISIS had gathered expecting to celebrate Christmas with senior military leadership from around the region. They had absolutely no idea that the President and First Lady were about to walk into that room. And when they did, it was a sight and a scene and a sound I hope I never forget. The room erupted. Men and women from every race, religion, and region, every political party, every demographic you can imagine, started chanting in perfect unison over and over and over again, USA, USA, USA. It was an absolutely perfect. One of the young soldiers yelled from the back, "Mr. President, I re-enlisted in the military because of you." And the president said, "And son, I'm here because of you." Shortly after, that young soldier came up to me. He said, "Sarah, you have a tough job." I told him, "What I do is nothing. You take bombs and bullets. That's a tough job." And in a moment that I know I'll cherish for the rest of my life, that soldier reached up and he pulled the Brave Rifles patch he wore on his shoulder, and he placed it into my hand, a sign of ultimate respect. And he said, "Sarah, we are in this together." Overwhelmed with emotion and speechless, I just hugged him with tears in my eyes and a grateful heart for our heroes who keep us free. That young man and everyone who has served before him, all of those who serve alongside him, and the thousands we know who will be called upon to serve after him, deserve to know they have a country and a community back home doing our part in the fight for freedom. America is great because we are free. But today, our freedom is under attack, and the America we love is in danger. President Biden and the Democrats have failed you, and it's time for a change. A new generation of Republican leaders are stepping up, not to be caretakers of the status quo, but to be change makers for the American people. We know not what the future holds, but we know who holds the future in his hands. And with God as our witness, we will show the world that America is still the place where freedom reigns and liberty will never die. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
Okay, Sarah Huckabee Sanders with the GOP response to the State of the Union, back out live outside the governor's mansion there in Little Rock. We're going to take a quick commercial break here on Live Now from Fox. When we come back, though, we'll be breaking down what Governor Huckabee Sanders said there in her rebuttal to President Biden's State of the Union tonight. We'll also be going over key highlights from that speech as well when we come back. And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox on this State of the Union night. We just watched